This is the Black Orchid Killer, a Hercule Poirot mystery. Welcome back to the Little Grey Cells. I'm Arthur Hastings, and thank you for joining me tonight on this journey. If you're joining us for the first time, we invite you to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a mystery. Tonight, we travel to the crossroads of civilizations, where ancient trade routes carried not only silk and spices, but also secrets and death. Dim your lights, Poirot yourself a tisane, and prepare to exercise your own grey cells. Chapter 1. The First Orchid. The Morning Post brought many things to Hercule Poirot's comfortable London flat in Whitehaven Mansions. Invitations to society events he would politely decline with carefully worded regrets. Letters from admirers of his detective work who sought to express their gratitude or request his assistance. Bills from his tailor that he would pay with the punctuality he applied to all matters of business and honour. But the package that arrived on that grey February morning, delivered by a messenger who could offer no description of the sender, was unlike anything Poirot had received before in his long and distinguished career. It was a small box, wrapped in paper of the deepest black, and tied with a ribbon of rich purple that seemed to shimmer with dark significance. There was no return address, no indication of who had sent it or why, no postmark that might reveal its origin. Poirot examined it with the careful attention he gave to all things unusual, noting the quality of the wrapping paper, the precision with which the ribbon had been tied, the faint but distinctive scent that seemed to emanate from within, a perfume that was at once sweet and somehow ominous. He opened the box with deliberate care, his sensitive fingers noting the quality of the cardboard and the precision with which it had been constructed, and what he found inside made his grey cells spark with immediate interest and a frisson of something that might have been called unease. A flower. A single orchid of the most extraordinary colour. Not merely dark, but truly black. Its petals seeming to absorb the light rather than reflect it, creating the impression of a void in the shape of a blossom. The bloom was perfect, each petal precisely formed according to nature's exacting specifications, and it rested on a bed of black velvet, like a jewel in its presentation case, a jewel of incomparable rarity and disturbing beauty. Beneath the flower was a card, printed in elegant script that suggested both education and a certain theatrical flair. The first has fallen. More will follow. Can you stop me, Monsieur Poirot? I think not, but you are welcome to try. The game has begun, and I intend to play it to the end. No signature, no explanation, no indication of identity or motive, just the flower and its cryptic, challenging message. A gauntlet thrown down before the famous detective by someone who clearly wished to match wits with the greatest investigative mind in Europe. Poirot was still contemplating this strange and troubling delivery when his telephone rang with sudden urgency. It was Inspector James Hartley of Scotland Yard, and his voice carried the particular tension that Poirot had learned to associate with serious crimes. The kind of crimes that would test even his formidable abilities. Monsieur Poirot, I apologize for disturbing you so early, but we have a situation that I believe requires your unique talents. A body was discovered this morning in Regent's Park, a young woman, strangled. And there was something left on her body that, well, I think you need to see it for yourself. A black orchid, perhaps? The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. How could you possibly know that? Because, mon ami, I have just received one myself, with a most interesting message attached. The scene in Regent's Park was cordoned off by the time Poirot arrived in a taxi, police constables keeping the curious morning crowds at bay, while detectives moved methodically through the area, searching for any evidence that might have been left behind. The body had been found near the ornamental gardens, positioned with deliberate care on a wrought iron bench, as though the victim had simply fallen asleep while enjoying the winter scenery and never woken from her eternal slumber. She was young, perhaps 25 years of age, and had been remarkably beautiful in life, with the kind of features that artists sought to capture and poets sought to celebrate. Her dark hair was arranged neatly around her face, her expensive clothing undisturbed, despite what must have been a violent death. Her delicate hands folded across her chest, in a pose that suggested peaceful repose. And there, resting between her folded hands like a funeral offering from some ancient ritual, was a black orchid identical to the one Poirot had received that very morning in his mysterious package. Her name was Eleanor Blackwood, Hartley explained, as Poirot knelt beside the bench to examine the scene with his characteristic attention to detail. Daughter of Sir Reginald Blackwood, the wealthy industrialist whose factories employ thousands of workers throughout the north of England. She was reported missing 2 days ago after failing to return from a social engagement, and her family has been absolutely frantic with worry ever since. I'm afraid this is not the outcome they were hoping for. The cause of death was strangulation, according to the preliminary examination conducted by our medical examiner this morning. But there's something distinctly odd about the manner of it. No defensive wounds on her hands or arms, no signs of struggle in the surrounding area. It's as though she simply allowed someone to kill her without offering any resistance whatsoever, or was rendered incapable of resistance before the final act was committed. Poirot knelt beside the body with the careful reverence he always showed toward the dead, studying the black orchid with intense concentration that revealed the full engagement of his formidable grey cells. This flower, it is most unusual, most extraordinary. The black orchid, or Orchidaceae niger, as it is known to botanists, is exceedingly rare, almost impossible to cultivate outside its native volcanic habitat. Whoever left this specimen has access to considerable resources and highly specialized knowledge that very few people in the world possess. You think the flower is significant beyond mere decoration? I think everything about this murder is significant, Inspector Hartley. Every detail has been carefully considered and deliberately placed. The killer has gone to extraordinary lengths to create a tableau, a work of art, if you will. The positioning of the body with such care, the arrangement of the hair to frame her face, the placement of the flower between her hands, like an offering. This is not a crime of passion committed in the heat of anger, nor is it an opportunistic killing by a random predator. This is a performance. A carefully staged theatrical production designed to convey a specific message. A performance for whom? What audience could possibly appreciate such horror? Poirot straightened slowly, his expression grave and troubled in a way that Hartley had rarely seen. For me, I fear. The message I received this morning at my residence made it quite clear that I am intended to be the audience for this particular drama, and that more acts are yet to come before the final curtain falls. Chapter 2. The Blackwood Family. Sir Reginald Blackwood received Poirot in the library of his distinguished Mayfair townhouse, a room that spoke eloquently of old money and older traditions, handed down through generations of accumulated wealth and privilege. The industrialist was a man in his mid-60s, silver-haired and distinguished in bearing, with the commanding presence of someone accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed without question. But the events of the past several days had clearly taken their toll on him. His face was grey with grief and exhaustion, and his hands trembled noticeably as he poured brandy from a crystal decanter that had probably been in his family for a century or more. "Thank you for coming to see me, Monsieur Poirot. Inspector Hartley speaks very highly of your abilities and your dedication to justice. And God knows we need someone with extraordinary abilities just now. My daughter..." His voice broke with emotion, and he paused to compose himself before continuing. "My daughter deserves the best investigator in the world working to find her killer. I am deeply sorry for your tragic loss, Sir Reginald. I will do everything in my power to bring your daughter's killer to justice. I give you my solemn word on that. But to accomplish this task, I will need your complete cooperation and absolute honesty, even if some questions may seem intrusive or painful. Ask whatever you must. I will answer truthfully." "Then tell me about your daughter, Sir Reginald. Tell me about Eleanor. Her life, her friends, her activities, her relationships. Any detail, however small or seemingly insignificant, may prove vital to understanding why she was targeted and by whom." The portrait that emerged from Sir Reginald's recollections was of a young woman who had everything: wealth, beauty, social position, and the prospects of a brilliant marriage, and who chose to use her advantages not for personal pleasure, but to help others less fortunate than herself. Eleanor Blackwood had been deeply and passionately involved in charitable work, particularly organisations that assisted women and children living in the grinding poverty that existed alongside London's wealth and splendour. She had sat on the boards of several prominent foundations, organised fundraising events that raised thousands of pounds for worthy causes, and personally visited the institutions she supported to ensure that her contributions were being used effectively. She had a rare gift for making people feel seen and valued, her father said, his voice thick with grief, but also with pride in the woman his daughter had become. Whether they were duchesses at charity balls or scullery maids in the kitchens of the institutions she visited, Eleanor treated everyone with the same warmth and genuine respect. She believed that privilege carried responsibility, that those who had been blessed with fortune had an obligation to share that fortune with those who had not been so blessed. And her social life beyond her charitable work? I understand she was engaged to be married. To Lord Philip Ashworth, yes. A fine young man from an excellent family. They were to be married in June, in what would have been the social event of the season. Philip is absolutely devastated by what has happened, as you might imagine. They had known each other since childhood, you see, and their love was genuine rather than merely convenient. I should very much like to speak with Lord Ashworth at your earliest convenience, if you can arrange such a meeting. Of course. I will send word to him immediately. He's been here at the house every day since Eleanor disappeared, trying to help with the search in any way he could. He's in the drawing room at this very moment, if you wish to see him now rather than later. That would be most helpful, Sir Reginald. Time is of the essence in such investigations, and every hour that passes may allow crucial evidence to slip away. Lord Philip Ashworth was a handsome man in his late 20s, with the polished manner characteristic of the English aristocracy, and eyes that were still red and swollen from weeping. He rose immediately when Poirot entered the drawing room, extending his hand with the automatic courtesy that had been bred into him from birth, despite his obvious and overwhelming distress. Monsieur Poirot, thank you for involving yourself in this terrible business. I am profoundly grateful that a detective of your reputation and ability has agreed to investigate Eleanor's death. Eleanor spoke of you once, you know. She had read about your famous cases in the newspapers and journals, and she greatly admired your dedication to justice and your determination to see that the guilty did not escape punishment. She was very kind to say so, and I am honoured by her memory. Lord Ashworth, I must ask you some questions that may seem intrusive or perhaps even painful to answer, but I assure you they are absolutely necessary for the investigation. Ask anything you wish, Monsieur Poirot. I have nothing whatsoever to hide, and I want nothing more than to see Eleanor's killer brought to account for this monstrous crime. If there is any way I can help you achieve that goal, I will do so, without hesitation. When did you last see Miss Blackwood, before her unfortunate disappearance? 3 days ago, on the evening before she vanished. We had dinner together at the Savoy, a lovely dinner, full of talk about our wedding plans and our hopes for the future together. She seemed perfectly happy, perfectly normal. There was no indication that anything was wrong. And the social engagement she was attending when she disappeared? A charity auction at the Botanical Society. Eleanor was passionate about their work. They maintain extensive greenhouses and support research into rare plant species. She was a major donor. Poirot's ears pricked at this information. The Botanical Society. They cultivate rare plants. What do you say? Exotic species from around the world. Orchids are one of their specialities, I believe. Eleanor often visited their facilities to see the latest specimens, including, perhaps, black orchids. Ashworth looked startled. I don't know. Is that significant? It may be very significant indeed. Poirot rose from his chair. Lord Ashworth, I thank you for your assistance. I may have more questions as the investigation progresses. Anything I can do to help, Monsieur Poirot? Anything at all. Chapter 3. The Botanical Society. The headquarters of the London Botanical Society occupied a sprawling complex in Kew, adjacent to the famous gardens, but maintained as a separate institution. The main building was a Victorian Gothic structure of red brick and ornate stonework, but the true heart of the organisation lay behind it. A series of massive greenhouses that contained one of the finest collections of exotic plants in the world. Poirot was received by Dr. Helena Marsh, the Society's Director of Research, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of academic authority. She led him through the public areas and into the restricted research facilities, where the most valuable and delicate specimens were maintained. Miss Blackwood was one of our most generous supporters, Dr. Marsh explained as they walked. Her contributions funded an entire wing of tropical research. She visited frequently. She had a genuine passion for botany, not merely the social cachet of supporting a prestigious institution. And she had access to the research facilities, to the rare specimens. Full access. As a major donor, she was granted privileges that ordinary members do not enjoy. She could visit whenever she wished, and she often did, sometimes spending hours in the greenhouses, simply admiring the flowers.
Did she have particular favourites among the specimens?
The orchids fascinated her especially. We have one of the finest orchid collections in Europe, including several species that exist nowhere else in cultivation.
Including black orchids?
Dr. Marsh stopped walking and turned to face Poirot directly. You know about the black orchids. How? A specimen was left on Miss Blackwood's body. Another was delivered to my residence this morning. The colour drained from Dr. Marsh's face. That's impossible. Our black orchids are among the rarest specimens in the world. There are only 6 plants in existence, all of them here in our facilities. The security around them is extraordinary. And yet, someone has obtained at least 2 blooms. I should like to see these orchids, if you please. The Black Orchid Chamber was a climate-controlled room within the largest greenhouse, accessible only through a series of locked doors. Dr. Marsh produced a keycard and led Poirot through the security measures, her expression increasingly troubled. The orchids were displayed in individual cases, each plant illuminated by carefully calibrated lighting that mimicked their native environment. They were extraordinary, flowers of such deep purple that they appeared truly black, their petals seeming to drink in the light around them. The Orchidaceae niger, Dr. Marsh said softly, native to a single volcanic island in Indonesia, discovered only 30 years ago and nearly extinct in the wild. These 6 plants represent the entire cultivated population outside their native habitat. Poirot counted the plants carefully. You say there are 6. I count only 5. Dr. Marsh's face went white. She counted, then counted again, her hands beginning to shake. That's not possible. All 6 were here yesterday. I checked them myself as part of my daily rounds. Then someone has taken one. Someone with access to this room, with knowledge of how to remove a plant without triggering alarms, with the expertise to transport it safely. Poirot's grey cells were working furiously. How many people have such access, Dr. Marsh? A handful. Myself, my assistant, Dr. Paul Winters, the head of security, and Miss Blackwood herself. Anyone else? Dr. Marsh hesitated. There is one other. A private collector who has been granted special research privileges in exchange for substantial funding. His name is Marcus Thorne. Chapter 4. The Collector. Marcus Thorne lived in a mansion on the outskirts of London, a sprawling estate whose grounds were dominated by a private greenhouse complex that rivaled the Botanical Society's facilities in size, if not in prestige. Poirot's research had revealed that Thorne was one of the world's foremost collectors of rare plants, a man who had spent decades and millions of pounds assembling specimens that existed nowhere else in private hands. The man himself was something of a recluse, rarely appearing in society and conducting most of his business through intermediaries. But he agreed to meet with Poirot readily enough, receiving him in a study filled with botanical illustrations and pressed flower specimens. Thorne was perhaps 50, with the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time indoors, and eyes that held an unsettling intensity. He wore a suit of impeccable cut, but somehow gave the impression of being uncomfortable in human company, as though he would rather be among his plants than among people. Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you. I understand you are investigating the unfortunate death of Miss Blackwood. I am, and I understand that you had access to the Black Orchid collection at the Botanical Society. The same collection from which a specimen appears to have been stolen. You suspect me of the theft? Or of the murder? I suspect everyone until I have evidence to the contrary. It is the only rational approach. Thorne smiled thinly. I appreciate rationality. Very well. I will tell you what I know. Yes, I had access to the black orchids. Dr. Marsh granted me research privileges 2 years ago in exchange for a significant donation. I have visited the collection perhaps a dozen times since then. And did you remove any specimens? I did not. The black orchids are remarkable, but I have no need to steal them. I have my own. Poirot's eyebrows rose. You have black orchids. The Botanical Society believes theirs are the only cultivated specimens outside Indonesia. The Botanical Society is mistaken. I acquired my specimens through private channels. A collector in Jakarta who had cultivated them in secret for years before his death. His estate sold me 3 plants, all of which are thriving in my facilities. You can prove this? I can show you the plants themselves if you wish, and the documentation of their acquisition. I would like that very much. The tour of Thorne's greenhouses was an education in obsession. The facilities were state-of-the-art, climate-controlled to exacting specifications, filled with specimens that would have made any botanist weep with envy. And in a private chamber, accessible only to Thorne himself, 3 black orchids bloomed in perfect health. You see, Thorne said, I have no need to steal from the Botanical Society. I have everything I could want right here. And yet someone with expertise in rare orchids has committed murder using these flowers as a signature. If not you, then who? Thorne was silent for a long moment. There are perhaps a dozen people in England with the knowledge and resources to obtain black orchids. Most are academics or institutional collectors with no motive for murder. But there is one name that comes to mind. A man who was once a respected botanist, but fell from grace some years ago. His name? Dr. Victor Crane. He was expelled from the Botanical Society for attempting to steal specimens, and he has been obsessed with black orchids ever since. He believes they possess certain properties that the scientific community refuses to acknowledge. What kind of properties? Mystical ones. Dr. Crane has become convinced that the black orchid is connected to death, that it can be used in rituals to commune with the departed, to extend life, perhaps even to grant immortality. He is, in short, quite mad. Where can I find this Dr. Crane? That I do not know. He dropped out of respectable society years ago, and his current whereabouts are a mystery. But if someone is killing people and leaving black orchids on their bodies, Victor Crane would be my first suspect. Chapter 5. The Second Orchid. The second murder occurred 3 days after the first, and this time Poirot received his orchid and message before the body was discovered. The package arrived at dawn, delivered by a messenger service that could provide no useful description of the sender. Inside was another perfect black orchid, another cryptic card. The second has fallen. Did you enjoy the puzzle, Monsieur Poirot? I hope so, because there will be more. Each death brings me closer to my goal, and nothing you do can stop me. Poirot immediately contacted Inspector Hartley, who dispatched officers to search for the body. It was found 3 hours later in Hampstead Heath, positioned with the same careful artistry as the first victim. A young woman, strangled, a black orchid placed between her folded hands. Her name was Catherine Hartwell, and she was a nurse at a charity hospital, one of the institutions that Eleanor Blackwood had supported. The connection between the victims was immediately apparent, though its significance remained unclear. They were friends, Lord Ashworth confirmed when Poirot questioned him about the second victim. Eleanor recruited Catherine to work at the hospital. She had enormous respect for her dedication to the patients. They saw each other regularly at various charitable functions. And they had other friends in common? Other connections? The entire circle, really. Eleanor's charitable work brought her into contact with dozens of people. Nurses, administrators, fellow donors, the recipients of aid. Catherine was part of that world. I will need a list of everyone in Miss Blackwood's social and charitable circles. anyone who might have known both victims. That will be a very long list, Monsieur Poirot. Then I had better begin examining it immediately. The list, when compiled, contained over 200 names, a testament to Eleanor Blackwood's extensive network and generous spirit. Poirot studied it with methodical attention, looking for patterns, connections, anything that might explain why these two women had been selected as victims. One name appeared repeatedly, associated with multiple organizations and events. Dr. Paul Winters, the assistant researcher at the Botanical Society, whom Dr. Marsh had mentioned as having access to the Black Orchid collection. Poirot arranged to meet with Dr. Winters at a cafe near the Society's facilities, a neutral location where the young scientist might speak more freely than in his workplace. Winters was in his early 30s, earnest and clearly nervous. He had the look of someone who had been sleeping poorly, and his hands fidgeted constantly with his coffee cup. "You wanted to speak with me about the murders, Monsieur Poirot. I've already told the police everything I know."
"Indulge me, Doctor. Sometimes a fresh perspective reveals details that were previously overlooked."
Poirot studied the young man carefully. "You knew both victims, I understand." "I knew Eleanor, Miss Blackwood, through her visits to the Society. She was interested in my research, asked intelligent questions, sometimes brought other donors to see our work. The second victim, Miss Hartwell, I met only once or twice at charitable events. And the Black Orchids? You have access to the collection." "I do, but I didn't take any specimens, if that's what you're suggesting. Those plants are my life's work. I would never damage them for any reason. Yet one is missing." "I know." Winter's voice was anguished. "Dr. Marsh thinks I took it, even if she hasn't said so directly. But I swear to you, Monsieur Poirot, I had nothing to do with the theft or the murders." "Then help me find who did. You know the world of rare plant collectors better than most. Who else might have the knowledge and motive to commit these crimes?" Winters hesitated, clearly wrestling with something.
"There is someone," he said finally. "Someone I've been reluctant to mention because I'm not certain, and the accusation would be devastating if I'm wrong."
"Tell me."
"Dr. Victor Crane. He was my mentor years ago, before his disgrace. He taught me everything I know about orchid cultivation, and he was obsessed, truly obsessed, with the Black Orchid. He believed it had mystical properties, that it was connected somehow to death and resurrection."
"I have heard Dr. Crane's name before. Marcus Thorne mentioned him as well."
"Thorne would know. He and Crane were rivals once, competing for the same specimens, the same funding. When Crane was expelled from the Society,
Thorne made sure everyone knew about it. He destroyed what was left of Crane's reputation. Where is Dr. Crane now?" "I don't know. No one does. He disappeared from the scientific community years ago. But if anyone is capable of these murders, the planning, the symbolism, the use of the black orchids, it would be him." Chapter 3. Extended. The investigation deepens. The Botanical Society's facilities proved to be far more extensive than Poirot had initially anticipated. Beyond the main research building and the public greenhouses, there were private laboratories, storage facilities, a comprehensive library of botanical texts, and specialized chambers for cultivating the most delicate specimens. Dr. Marsh gave Poirot a complete tour, explaining the various research programs and introducing him to the staff members who worked in each area. The society employed over 30 people, scientists, technicians, gardeners, security personnel, any of whom might have had access to the Black Orchid collection. "Security is one of our greatest challenges," Dr. Marsh admitted, as they walked through the tropical greenhouse, surrounded by towering palms and cascading vines. "We maintain specimens worth millions of pounds, collected from the most remote corners of the earth. Some of these plants exist nowhere else in cultivation. If they were lost, an entire species might vanish forever. And yet, someone was able to remove a black orchid without detection." "Yes, that troubles me greatly. We have surveillance cameras, electronic locks, alarm systems. Whoever took that orchid knew exactly how to bypass our security measures." "Which suggests an insider, someone familiar with your systems and procedures." "Or someone who had help from an insider." Dr. Marsh's expression was troubled. "I've worked with these people for years. I can't imagine any of them being involved in something like this." "People often surprise us, Dr. Marsh. The capacity for both good and evil exists in everyone. Circumstances determine which emerges." Poirot spent the remainder of the afternoon interviewing staff members, building a picture of the organization and its internal dynamics. What emerged was a world of passionate dedication and simmering rivalries. The scientific staff competed fiercely for research funding, laboratory space, and academic recognition. Personal disputes sometimes escalated into professional sabotage. Experiments disrupted, specimens damaged, publications plagiarized. It was a hothouse environment in more ways than one, and the pressure sometimes produced ugly behavior. Dr. Paul Winters, the young assistant researcher, was particularly forthcoming about the tensions within the organization. "Dr. Marsh tries to maintain harmony, but it's difficult when everyone is competing for the same limited resources," he explained. "Some of my colleagues would do almost anything to advance their careers. Not murder, certainly, but they're not above cutting corners or taking credit for others' work." "And the Black Orchid collection? Was there particular competition for access to those specimens?" "Enormous competition. The Black Orchid is the holy grail of orchid research. Anyone who could unlock its secrets would be guaranteed fame and funding for life. Dr. Marsh strictly limits access to prevent conflicts, but there's always resentment from those who are excluded." "Who resents being excluded most strongly?" Winters hesitated. "There's a researcher named Dr. Sarah Chen, who has been requesting access for years. She believes she has a breakthrough technique for propagating rare orchids, and she's convinced the Black Orchid collection would validate her theories. Dr. Marsh has repeatedly denied her requests, citing concerns about the specimen's fragility." "And Dr. Chen's reaction to these denials?" "Anger. Frustration. She's made some intemperate statements about Dr. Marsh and the organization's policies. Nothing threatening, exactly, but her bitterness is evident to everyone." Poirot made a note to interview Dr. Chen at the earliest opportunity. Chapter 4. Extended. The Rival Researcher. Dr. Sarah Chen was a woman in her late 30s, with the intense focus of someone who had devoted her life to a single pursuit. She received Poirot in her small office at the Botanical Society, surrounded by books, papers, and the detritus of ongoing experiments. "I know why you're here," she said before Poirot could speak. "The Black Orchid murders. Everyone suspects everyone else, and I'm sure my name has come up. I've made no secret of my frustration with Dr. Marsh's policies. You have been denied access to the Black Orchid collection. Repeatedly. For 5 years, I've submitted proposals that were rejected without serious consideration. Dr. Marsh claims to be protecting the specimens, but the truth is, she's protecting her own research prerogatives. She doesn't want anyone else working on the black orchid, because she wants to be the one who solves its mysteries. That is a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. The black orchid represents the most exciting research opportunity in the botanical world, and it's being hoarded by someone who hasn't published a significant paper in years. Meanwhile, people like me, people with genuine ideas and proven track records, are shut out. Did your frustration ever lead you to consider alternative means of accessing the collection? Dr. Chen's eyes narrowed. If you're asking whether I stole a black orchid, the answer is no. If you're asking whether I killed 2 women and left those flowers on their bodies, the answer is also no. I'm a scientist, not a murderer. Where were you on the nights when Eleanor Blackwood and Catherine Hartwell were killed? At home, working on my research. I can't prove it. I live alone, and I don't have colleagues who can vouch for my whereabouts. But then, neither can most of the people who work here. Did you know the victims? Eleanor Blackwood visited the society frequently. I saw her in the greenhouses several times, but we never spoke. I didn't know the other woman at all. And Dr. Victor Crane. His name has been mentioned as someone with an obsession regarding the black orchid. Something flickered across Dr. Chen's face. Recognition, perhaps, or caution. I knew Victor Crane. He was a colleague years ago, before his difficulties. A brilliant researcher, but his ideas became increasingly unorthodox. When the society expelled him, many of us felt it was the right decision, even if we sympathized with his circumstances. You remained in contact with him after his expulsion? No, I haven't spoken to Victor in years. But I've heard rumors that he's still conducting research somewhere, still pursuing his theories about the black orchid's mystical properties. Do you believe those theories have merit? I believe Victor Crane is a damaged man who lost his grip on reality after his wife's death. His ideas about death and resurrection, about the orchid's supernatural powers, they're the products of grief and obsession, not scientific inquiry. And yet, someone is using the black orchid as a symbol of murder. Someone with access to rare specimens and specialized knowledge. Yes, and that someone isn't me. Dr. Chen's voice was firm. I've devoted my life to understanding these plants, to preserving species that might otherwise be lost forever. I would never use them as instruments of death. Chapter 5. Extended. The evidence accumulates. The investigation into Eleanor Blackwood's background revealed a woman whose life had been more complicated than her father had initially suggested. Yes, she had been devoted to charitable work. Yes, she had been engaged to a suitable young man. Yes, she had seemed happy and fulfilled. But there were shadows in her past that Sir Reginald had either forgotten or chosen not to mention. 5 years earlier, Eleanor had been briefly engaged to another man, a doctor named Thomas Hardy, who had worked at one of the hospitals she supported. The engagement had ended abruptly, for reasons that no one seemed willing to discuss, and Hardy had left London shortly afterward. Poirot tracked down Dr. Hardy through medical records and correspondence, eventually locating him at a small practice in Yorkshire. He agreed to speak with Poirot by telephone, his voice revealing old wounds that had never fully healed. Eleanor and I were going to be married, Hardy said. I loved her, truly loved her, not for her money or her position, but for herself. But there were things about her family that she kept hidden, things that I only discovered when it was almost too late.
What things? The White Rose Society. Eleanor was being groomed to take her mother's place in the organization, to carry on the traditions and secrets that had been passed down for generations. When I started asking questions about what those traditions involved, Eleanor became frightened. She said there were things I couldn't know, things that would put us both in danger. Did she tell you what those things were? Only hints. She mentioned a death that had been covered up, old crimes that still needed to be protected. She said that joining the society meant accepting certain responsibilities, including the responsibility to keep silent about the past. And you broke off the engagement because of this? She broke it off. She said she couldn't choose between me and her family obligations. And in the end, family won. I was devastated, but I understood. The pull of blood and tradition is strong, especially in families like hers. Did you maintain any contact with Eleanor after the engagement ended? No. She wrote to me once, about a year later, saying she was sorry for how things had ended and hoping I had found happiness. I never replied. It was too painful. And where were you on the nights when Eleanor and Catherine Hartwell were killed? At home, in Yorkshire, seeing patients. I have records and witnesses who can confirm my whereabouts. I didn't kill Eleanor, Monsieur Poirot. I loved her once, and part of me still does. I could never have harmed her. Poirot believed him. The grief in Hardy's voice was too raw, too genuine to be feigned. But the information he had provided added another dimension to the case. A secret organization, hidden crimes, generations of silence. The White Rose Society was clearly more than a charitable organization. It was a conspiracy, bound together by shared guilt and mutual protection. Chapter 6. Extended. The Society's Secrets. The more Poirot learned about the White Rose Society, the more troubled he became. What had seemed like a simple, charitable organization was revealed to be a complex web of relationships, obligations, and secrets stretching back decades. The founding members, Lady Margaret Ashworth, Mrs. Helena Thorne, the late Victoria Crane, and several others, had all grown up together in the same social circles. Their families had intermarried, done business together, shared holidays and celebrations. They were bound by ties of blood and friendship that went far beyond the formal structure of the society. And they were bound, as Poirot was beginning to understand, by a shared secret that none of them could acknowledge. The servant girl who had died 20 years ago was named Mary Collins. She had been 17 years old, the daughter of a housekeeper at one of the great estates, working her first job in service. According to the official records, she had fallen down a flight of stairs during a house party and died of her injuries. But Poirot's investigation suggested a different story. Mary Collins had not fallen. She had been pushed during an altercation with one of the young guests. The exact circumstances were unclear, but witnesses reported hearing raised voices, then a scream, then the terrible sound of a body tumbling down the stairs. The guests at that party had included most of the women who would later found the White Rose Society. They had all been present when Mary Collins died, and they had all agreed to maintain the fiction that her death had been an accident. It was a different time, Lady Ashworth would later explain to Poirot. The social divide between families like ours and servants like Mary was absolute. When the accident happened, when Mary died, our families closed ranks to protect us. They paid off the Collins family, influenced the coroner's verdict, ensured that the matter would never be investigated properly. But it wasn't an accident, was it? Someone pushed her. I don't know. I truly don't know. There was an argument. Mary had seen something she shouldn't have, overheard a conversation that revealed indiscretions. She threatened to tell, and one of us confronted her. What happened next, whether she fell or was pushed, whether it was accident or murder, I've never been certain. And you've carried this uncertainty for 20 years. We've all carried it. The guilt, the fear, the knowledge that our comfortable lives were built on a foundation of lies. The White Rose Society was founded partly as penance, a way to do good, to help others, to somehow make up for what we had done. But it was never enough. It could never be enough. Chapter 7. Extended. The Killer's Psychology. Understanding Dr. Victor Crane required understanding the depths of his grief and the peculiar nature of his obsession. Poirot spent considerable time researching the botanist's history, speaking with former colleagues, and examining the writings he had published before his descent into madness. Crane had once been brilliant, a rising star in his field, respected by peers and admired by students. His research on orchid cultivation had advanced the discipline significantly, and his technical innovations had made it possible to preserve species that would otherwise have been lost. But the death of his wife had changed everything. Victoria Crane's suicide had shattered something fundamental in his psyche, transforming his scientific interest in the black orchid into something much darker and more obsessive. His later writings, published in obscure journals and privately printed pamphlets, revealed a mind that had crossed the boundary between science and mysticism. He wrote about the black orchid's connection to death, about rituals that could supposedly use the flower to communicate with the departed, about the possibility of resurrection through botanical means. The black orchid exists at the boundary between life and death, one passage read. It thrives in conditions that kill other plants, feeds on decay, blooms in eternal darkness. It is the flower of the underworld, the bloom of Persephone, the key to mysteries that science has forgotten and religion has forbidden. These were not the words of a scientist. They were the words of a man who had lost his grip on reality and was reaching desperately for something, anything, that might bring his wife back from the grave. Dr. Josephine Wells, the museum curator who had known Crane before his disgrace, provided additional insight into his psychology. Victor was always intense, but he was also kind, she said. He genuinely cared about his students, his colleagues, his research. When Victoria died, that kindness seemed to drain away, replaced by something harder and colder. He began to see the world in terms of enemies and betrayals, wrongs that needed to be righted, scores that needed to be settled. And the women of the White Rose Society became his enemies, because they had wronged Victoria. In his mind, they had murdered her as surely as if they had given her those pills themselves. He couldn't accept that her death was a choice, a decision made by a woman in unbearable pain. He needed someone to blame, someone to punish. And so he transformed his grief into revenge. Yes, and he used the black orchid, the symbol of his scientific obsession, as the instrument of that revenge. It was, in a twisted way, a kind of tribute to Victoria. She had loved flowers, you see. Their garden was her pride and joy. By killing with orchids, Victor was somehow involving her in his campaign, making her a partner in his vengeance. The psychology was disturbed, but understandable.
Crane had been a man of science, trained to find patterns and explanations to impose order on chaos. When his wife's death defied explanation, when the cruelty that had driven her to suicide remained unpunished, he had created his own pattern, his own explanation, his own form of justice. It was madness, but it was also, in its terrible way, love. Chapter 8. Extended. The trap is set. The planning of the trap at Kew Gardens required careful coordination between Poirot, Inspector Hartley, and the Gardens administration. The facility was vast, over 300 acres of grounds, dozens of greenhouses, hundreds of potential hiding places. To have any chance of catching the killer, they needed to predict exactly where he would strike. Poirot's analysis of the previous murders suggested several criteria that the killer would use in selecting his location. The site needed to be accessible but secluded, allowing him to arrange his tableau without interruption. It needed to have botanical significance, connecting the murder to his larger obsession with the black orchid. And it needed to be dramatic, a fitting stage for the performance he was creating. The Princess of Wales Conservatory, the garden's largest greenhouse, containing plants from 10 different climatic zones, seemed the most likely target. It was a spectacular structure, recently renovated, and it contained some of the garden's most impressive specimens. A murder committed there would make headlines around the world. But Poirot also considered the Temperate House, an enormous Victorian glasshouse that had recently reopened after extensive restoration, and the Palm House, the iconic structure that had become the symbol of Kew itself. "We cannot cover all 3 locations adequately," Hartley observed when they reviewed the plan. "Our resources are limited, and spreading too thin might allow the killer to escape. Then we must choose correctly." Poirot studied the map of the gardens, his grey cells working furiously. "The killer is obsessed with orchids. Where are the orchids displayed?" "The Princess of Wales Conservatory has the largest collection, but there are also orchids in the Temperate House and in several of the smaller display houses." "He will go where the orchids are strongest. The Princess of Wales Conservatory." "You're certain?" "I am certain of nothing, except that we must act." If I am wrong, another woman will die. If I am right, we will catch a killer. The trap was set with meticulous attention to detail. Officers were positioned throughout the conservatory, hidden among the tropical plants, wearing dark clothing that would blend with the shadows. Motion sensors were installed at key entry points, ready to alert the team if anyone approached. And Lady Margaret Ashworth, one of the killer's remaining targets, was moved to a safe location, while a police officer of similar build and colouring took her place in public, creating the appearance that she remained unprotected. Poirot himself took a position deep within the conservatory, near the orchid collection that had been recreated from specimens preserved from the original display. It was uncomfortable, the humidity was oppressive, and the darkness was disorienting. But he remained focused on the task at hand. The killer would come. He had to come. His message had promised a 3rd victim, and a man driven by such obsessive hatred would not abandon his mission simply because the police were watching. The hours crawled past. Poirot heard the night sounds of the conservatory, the drip of water from irrigation systems, the rustle of leaves in the artificial breeze, the occasional cry of a nocturnal bird in one of the tropical zones. He remained motionless, listening, waiting, his grey cells alert for any sign of the killer's approach. And then, just as doubt began to creep into his mind, he heard it.
the soft click of a door opening, the whisper of footsteps on the stone floor, and a woman's muffled cry that was quickly silenced. The killer had come.
And Poirot was ready. Chapter 6. The Search for Victor Crane. The search for Dr. Victor Crane led Poirot through the shadowy underworld of London's scientific community. The disgraced researchers, the failed academics, the brilliant minds that had fallen from grace and now eked out existences on the margins of respectable society. His first lead came from a former colleague of Crane's at the British Museum, a curator named Josephine Wells, who remembered the botanist from his days of prominence.
"Victor was brilliant, perhaps the most gifted researcher I've ever known," she said. "But he became increasingly erratic after his wife died. He began making claims about the black orchid that no serious scientist could support, that it had properties beyond the natural, that it could be used in rituals of death and rebirth."
The Botanical Society tried to help him, but when he was caught attempting to steal specimens for his experiments, they had no choice but to expel him. And after his expulsion, he vanished. There were rumors that he had set up a laboratory somewhere, that he was continuing his research in secret. But no one knew where, and frankly, most of us preferred not to know. Victor had become frightening by the end. The look in his eyes, the intensity of his obsession. He was not the same man we had once admired. Did he have any particular enemies? Anyone who might have provoked him to violence? Marcus Thorne, certainly. Their rivalry was legendary, and it was Thorne who ultimately provided the evidence that led to Victor's expulsion. But I can't imagine Victor killing innocent women to strike at Thorne. That would be madness of a different order entirely. Madness, Madame Wells, takes many forms. And from what I have learned of Dr. Crane, his particular form was deep and consuming. The next lead came from Inspector Hartley, whose officers had been canvassing the areas where the bodies were found, searching for witnesses who might have seen something unusual. "We found a homeless man who sleeps in Regent's Park," Hartley reported. "He says he saw someone carrying a woman's body 3 nights ago. A tall man with white hair, dressed in dark clothing. He thought it was strange, but didn't want to get involved with the police." A tall man with white hair. Does that match Dr. Crane's description? According to the records, Crane was tall and had prematurely white hair, even 20 years ago. If he's still alive, he'd be in his 60s now. Then we must find him. A man with such distinctive appearance should not be impossible to locate, even in a city as vast as London. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A dealer in rare botanical supplies contacted Poirot after reading about the murders in the newspapers, saying he had information that might be relevant. "I sell equipment to collectors and researchers, grow lights, climate control systems, specialized nutrients for exotic plants. About 6 months ago, a man came to me wanting to set up a facility for cultivating black orchids. He paid in cash, gave a false name, but I recognized him from photographs I'd seen years ago. It was Victor Crane." "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be. He's older now, more gaunt. But those eyes, I'd never forget those eyes." He ordered everything he would need to maintain a sophisticated greenhouse operation. "I can give you the delivery address." The address led to a warehouse in the East End, a nondescript building in a row of similar structures, its windows blacked out and its entrance secured by multiple locks. Poirot observed it for some time before approaching, noting the faint warmth that emanated from the building, even in the February cold, the subtle hum of electrical equipment, the absence of any visible activity. This is where he cultivates his orchids, Poirot murmured to himself. And perhaps where he plans his murders. He did not attempt to enter alone. That would have been foolish. Instead, he returned to Inspector Hartley with his findings, and together they assembled a team to raid the facility. What they found inside was both a laboratory and a temple. The main space had been converted into a greenhouse of remarkable sophistication, filled with exotic plants that seemed to pulse with unnatural vitality in the artificial light. And at the center, in a climate-controlled chamber of their own, were black orchids. Not 3 or 5, but dozens, blooming in profusion that should have been impossible given their rarity. "He's been breeding them," Hartley breathed, "creating his own supply." "For his rituals," Poirot agreed grimly. "Look at this." In a corner of the warehouse, partially hidden by hanging vines, was an altar of sorts, a raised platform draped in black velvet, surrounded by candles and strange symbols that seemed to blend botanical imagery with something darker. Photographs were arranged on the altar, dozens of them, all depicting women of various ages. Poirot recognized 2 of the faces, Eleanor Blackwood and Catherine Hartwell, the first 2 victims. Both photographs had been marked with an X in red ink. "He's choosing his victims from these photographs," Poirot said. "But who are the others? And why these particular women?" "There must be a pattern," Hartley said. "Something that connects them." "There is always a pattern. We simply have not yet perceived it." Poirot studied the photographs intently, his grey cells working at full capacity. "These women are all of similar age, 20s to 30s. All appear to be of comfortable means. Several are wearing what appears to be the same piece of jewellery, a brooch in the shape of a flower." "A flower? Like an orchid?" "Not an orchid. A rose. A white rose." The significance of the symbol became clear when Poirot consulted with Eleanor Blackwood's father later that day. "The White Rose Society," Sir Reginald confirmed. "It's a charitable organisation that Eleanor helped found several years ago. The members wear a white rose brooch to identify themselves. Catherine Hartwell was also a member, as are several dozen other women involved in charitable work throughout London." "All potential victims," Poirot said grimly. "Dr. Crane is targeting members of this specific organization. But why?" "I have no idea. The society does nothing controversial. We support hospitals, orphanages, shelters for women in need. We have no enemies that I know of." "Someone perceives you as enemies. Or perhaps the society itself is not the target. Perhaps one of its members is." "And the others are merely meant to draw attention or create fear." "But who? And for what purpose?" "That, Sir Reginald, is what I must discover before more innocent women die." Chapter 7. The pattern emerges. Poirot requested and received a complete membership list of the White Rose Society, along with detailed information about the organization's history, activities, and founding members. He studied the documents with the intensity of a scholar examining a rare manuscript, searching for the thread that would unravel the mystery. The society had been founded 5 years earlier by a group of wealthy women who wanted to formalize and coordinate their charitable activities. Eleanor Blackwood had been one of the founding members, along with Lady Margaret Ashworth, Lord Philip's mother, Mrs. Helena Thorne, wife of the orchid collector Marcus Thorne, and several others. But it was the name of the society's first president that caught Poirot's attention: Mrs. Victoria Crane. "Victor Crane had a wife," Poirot murmured, his grey cells crackling with sudden understanding. And she was connected to this organisation. Further research revealed the tragic story. Victoria Crane had died 6 years ago, just a year after the society was founded. The cause of death had been ruled suicide. She had taken an overdose of sleeping medication following a long battle with depression. Her husband, already exhibiting signs of the instability that would lead to his expulsion from the Botanical Society, had never recovered from the loss. He blames them, Poirot realised. He blames the women of the White Rose Society for his wife's death. But why? The answer came from Dr. Marsh at the Botanical Society, who remembered Victoria Crane from her brief involvement with the organisation. Victoria was a lovely woman, but deeply troubled, Dr. Marsh recalled. She had been close friends with several of the founding members of the White Rose Society. They had grown up together, moved in the same social circles. But there was some kind of falling out about a year before her death. She stopped attending meetings, withdrew from all social activities, became increasingly isolated. What caused the falling out? I never learned the specifics. Victoria wouldn't discuss it, and her friends, former friends, seemed determined to pretend nothing had happened. There were rumours of a scandal, something that had been covered up to protect the reputations of those involved. But whatever it was, it destroyed Victoria. She was never the same afterward. And her husband? Did he know what had happened? I assume so. Victor became increasingly paranoid and angry in the months before Victoria's death. He made accusations against certain women, said they had betrayed his wife, driven her to despair, effectively murdered her. No one took him seriously at the time. We assumed it was grief talking. But now, women connected to that group are being murdered, one by one, with black orchids left as signatures. Poirot's expression was grave. Dr. Crane is taking his revenge. Chapter 8. The Third Orchid. The third package arrived while Poirot was still absorbing the implications of what he had learned. This time, the message was more specific. The third falls tonight. Can you save her? Monsieur Poirot? I think not. She helped destroy my Victoria, and now she will join her in death. The Black Orchid claims its own. Poirot immediately contacted Inspector Hartley, and together they worked to identify potential victims from the White Rose Society who had been close to Victoria Crane. The list was short. Only 5 women had been among Victoria's intimate circle before the mysterious falling out. Eleanor Blackwood was dead. Catherine Hartwell was dead. That left 3 women who might be the killer's next target: Lady Margaret Ashworth, Mrs. Helena Thorne, and a Mrs. Beatrice Waverley, widow of a banking magnate. We need to protect all 3, Hartley said. Post officers at their homes, warn them to stay inside, not to receive any visitors. That may not be enough, Dr. Crane has demonstrated remarkable ability to reach his victims despite ordinary precautions. We need to anticipate where he will strike, not merely react to his movements. And how do you propose to do that? Poirot was silent for a long moment, his mind working through the possibilities. The killer has a pattern, not merely in his choice of victims, but in the locations where he leaves their bodies. Regent's Park for Eleanor Blackwood, Hampstead Heath for Catherine Hartwell. Both are public green spaces, places of natural beauty. If the pattern holds, the third body will be found in a similar location. There are dozens of parks in London, but not all are equally suitable for the killer's purposes. He seeks locations that are accessible but private, where he can arrange his tableau without being disturbed. He also seems to choose places with particular botanical significance. Regent's Park has notable gardens. Hampstead Heath has ancient woodland. So,
where would be the next logical choice? Poirot's eyes widened with sudden realization. Kew Gardens, the most famous botanical garden in England, with extensive grounds that would be deserted after dark. And it is adjacent to the Botanical Society's facilities, the place where Dr. Crane first began his obsession with the black orchid. That's a large area to cover. Then we must be strategic. Dr. Crane is not merely killing, he is performing a ritual, a ceremony of revenge. He will choose a location within the gardens that has symbolic significance for his purposes. The orchid houses, Hartley said.
If he's obsessed with orchids, that's where he'll want to display his work. Precisely. We must focus our resources there and pray that we have guessed correctly. The trap was set as darkness fell over London. Officers were positioned throughout Kew Gardens, with particular concentration around the orchid houses. Poirot himself took a position inside the main tropical greenhouse, concealed among the massive ferns and palm trees that created a jungle atmosphere, even in the heart of winter. The hours passed slowly. Midnight came and went. Poirot began to wonder if his deduction had been wrong, if the killer had chosen a different location entirely. And then, just before 2 a.m, he heard a sound. Soft footsteps, the whisper of fabric against leaves, and a woman's muffled cry. He moved through the greenhouse with silent urgency, following the sounds to their source. And there, in the heart of the orchid collection, he found them. Dr. Victor Crane stood over the unconscious form of Lady Margaret Ashworth, a black orchid in one hand and a silk cord in the other. He was tall and gaunt, his white hair wild around his face, his eyes burning with the light of obsession. "You found me, Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "I wondered if you would. They said you were clever, and they were right." "Step away from the woman, Dr. Crane. The police are surrounding this building. You cannot escape." "Escape?" Crane laughed bitterly. "I don't want to escape. I want to complete my work. These women destroyed my Victoria. They drove her to her death with their cruelty and their lies. They deserve to die. Every one of them." "What did they do, Dr. Crane?" What cruelty! What lies! You don't know? Crane's expression twisted with rage and grief. Then let me tell you. My Victoria was a good woman, a kind woman. She gave her heart to these people, believed they were her friends, and when she needed them most, they abandoned her. They cast her out, spread rumours about her, destroyed her reputation, all to protect themselves and their precious secrets. What secrets? Victoria discovered something that the founding members of the White Rose Society wanted to keep hidden. She threatened to expose them, and they retaliated. They told lies about her, turned society against her, made her life unbearable. And when she could bear no more, when she took those pills to end her suffering, not one of them came to her funeral. Not one of them expressed a moment's regret for what they had done. And so you decided to take revenge, to kill them one by one, leaving your black orchids as signatures. The black orchid is the flower of death, Monsieur Poirot. It blooms in darkness, feeds on decay, thrives where other plants would perish. It is the perfect symbol for what these women deserve. But Lady Ashworth was not responsible for your wife's death, nor were Eleanor Blackwood or Catherine Hartwell.
Whatever the founding members did, their children and associates were innocent.
No one is innocent! Crane's voice rose to a shriek. They all knew. They all participated in the cover-up, the conspiracy of silence. Victoria's death was convenient for all of them, and none of them lifted a finger to prevent it. While Crane ranted, Poirot had been slowly moving closer, positioning himself between the killer and his intended victim. Now he spoke again, his voice calm and measured. Dr. Crane, I understand your grief. I understand your desire for justice. But this is not justice. This is madness. Your wife would not want you to become a murderer in her name. Don't tell me what Victoria would want. You didn't know her. You don't know what she suffered. Then tell me. Tell me what happened, and I promise you that if there was wrongdoing, those responsible will face consequences. But legal consequences, Dr. Crane, not death at your hands. Something flickered in Crane's eyes, a moment of hesitation, of doubt. And in that moment, the police officers who had been silently surrounding the greenhouse made their move. The capture was swift, but not without violence. Crane struggled desperately, slashing at the officers with the silk cord, before he was finally subdued and handcuffed. Lady Ashworth was found to be unconscious, but unharmed. Crane had drugged her, but had not yet begun the strangulation that would have ended her life. As he was led away, Crane turned back to Poirot one last time. "It doesn't matter," he said. "You've stopped me, but you haven't stopped the truth. What they did to Victoria. It will come out eventually. The secrets always come out in the end." "Yes," Poirot agreed quietly. "They do." Chapter 9. The Truth Unveiled. The arrest of Dr. Victor Crane brought an end to the immediate danger, but Poirot's work was not complete. The killer's accusations had raised questions that demanded answers. Questions about what had happened to Victoria Crane, what secrets the founding members of the White Rose Society had been protecting, and whether there was any truth to the claims of conspiracy and cruelty. He began by interviewing the survivors of Crane's vendetta, Lady Margaret Ashworth and Mrs. Helena Thorne, both of whom had known Victoria Crane intimately before the mysterious falling out. Lady Ashworth was still recovering from her ordeal when Poirot visited her at her Mayfair townhouse. She was a woman in her 50s, elegantly dressed despite her pallor, with eyes that held both fear and something that might have been guilt. "You want to know what happened to Victoria?" she said, before Poirot could ask his first question. "I've been expecting this conversation since her husband began his killing spree." "Then you know there is truth to his accusations?" "Some truth, yes." "But not the whole truth. Never the whole truth." Lady Ashworth's hands twisted in her lap. "Victoria discovered something that we had all agreed to keep secret. Something that happened years ago, before the White Rose Society was even founded." "What did she discover?" "A death. An accidental death that we covered up to protect one of our own." The story that emerged was one of privilege, panic, and the lengths to which the wealthy will go to protect their reputations. 20 years ago, a group of young society women, the future founders of the White Rose Society, had been involved in a tragic accident. During a house party at a country estate, a servant girl had fallen down a flight of stairs and died. The circumstances were ambiguous. The girl may have tripped, or she may have been pushed, during an altercation with one of the guests. Rather than face an investigation that might expose uncomfortable truths about the party and its participants, the women had conspired to cover up the incident. The servant's death was attributed to natural causes.
Her family was paid a substantial sum to remain silent, and life went on as though nothing had happened. "We were young," Lady Ashworth said, her voice thick with old shame. "We were frightened. We didn't know what to do, and when the older generation, our mothers, our chaperones, told us to keep quiet, we obeyed. It was wrong, I know that now, but at the time, it seemed like the only option." And Victoria Crane discovered this secret? She found letters. One of the women had written to another about the incident, and the letters had been preserved in a family archive.
Victoria was helping to organise the archive as part of a charitable project, and she came across them by accident. What did she do? She confronted us, demanded that we come forward, confess what we had done, make amends to the servant's family. She said the guilt had been eating at us for 20 years, and it was time to face the consequences. And you refused. We panicked. Again. Lady Ashworth's voice broke. We told Victoria that she was overreacting, that the matter was too old to reopen, that coming forward would destroy our families and accomplish nothing. When she threatened to go public anyway, we ostracized her, spread rumors that she was unstable, that her claims were the fantasies of a disturbed mind. We made it impossible for her to be believed. And she took her own life, rather than continue living with the rejection and humiliation. Yes. Tears were streaming down Lady Ashworth's face now. We killed her as surely as if we had put those pills in her hand. And now her husband has been killing us in return. Perhaps we deserve it. No one deserves to be murdered, Lady Ashworth. But justice demands that old wrongs be addressed, even if the punishment is not death. Poirot's voice was stern, but not unkind. You must come forward now. Tell the authorities what happened 20 years ago. Let the family of that servant girl finally know the truth. And face prosecution, prison, disgrace. Face the consequences of your actions, whatever they may be. It is the only way to honour Victoria Crane's memory, and to prove that her husband's crimes, however twisted, were rooted in genuine injustice. Lady Ashworth was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. You're right, of course. We've been running from this for too long. It's time to stop running. Chapter 10. Confession and Consequence. The confession of Lady Margaret Ashworth, corroborated by Mrs. Helena Thorne and the surviving founding members of the White Rose Society, sent shockwaves through London's social elite. The revelation that some of society's most respected families had covered up the death of a servant girl for 20 years sparked outrage, scandal, and serious legal consequences. The original incident was thoroughly investigated, and while the passage of time made it impossible to determine with certainty whether the servant's death had been accidental or intentional, the cover-up itself was clearly criminal. Several of the women involved faced charges of conspiracy and obstruction of justice, and all faced the permanent destruction of their social standing. The servant's family, her elderly parents, her siblings, her nieces and nephews, finally learned the truth about what had happened to their daughter and sister. They were awarded substantial compensation from the estates of those involved, and, more importantly, they received the acknowledgement they had been denied for 2 decades. Dr. Victor Crane was tried for the murders of Eleanor Blackwood and Catherine Hartwell, as well as the attempted murder of Lady Margaret Ashworth. His defence argued that grief and obsession had rendered him temporarily insane, but the methodical nature of his crimes, the planning, the symbolism, the the deliberate targeting of specific victims demonstrated a mind that, however disturbed, was still capable of rational thought. He was convicted on all counts and sentenced to death, though there was considerable public sympathy for a man who had been driven to madness by the injustice done to his wife. Poirot attended the final day of the trial, watching as the verdict was delivered and the sentence pronounced. Afterward, he requested a brief meeting with the condemned man. "You came to gloat, Monsieur Poirot?" Crane asked, his voice flat and empty. "I came to tell you that you achieved what you set out to achieve. The truth about your wife's persecution has been revealed. Those who wronged her have faced consequences. Justice, however imperfect, has been served." "Justice?" Crane laughed bitterly. "2 innocent women are dead because of me. Eleanor Blackwood and Catherine Hartwell had nothing to do with what happened to Victoria. They were too young to have been involved in the original cover-up. I killed them anyway, because they were part of the organization that destroyed my wife." "Yes, and that is why you will hang." "I know." Crane's eyes met Poirot's, and for a moment, the madness seemed to recede, revealing the brilliant scientist he had once been. "Tell me, Monsieur Poirot, do you think there is an afterlife? Do you think I will see Victoria again?" "That is not for me to say, but I hope, for your sake, that you find the peace in death that eluded you in life." "Peace?" Crane smiled sadly. "I'm not sure I even remember what that feels like." As Poirot left the prison, he reflected on the case and its many victims, not only the dead, but the living whose lives had been destroyed by secrets, lies, and the terrible consequences of choices made long ago. The Black Orchid killer had been stopped. Justice had been served, however imperfectly. But the wounds inflicted by this case would take years to heal, if they ever healed at all. Such was the nature of revenge. It destroyed not only its targets, but its wielders as well, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. Chapter 9. Extended. The aftermath of arrest. The capture of Dr. Victor Crane was only the beginning of a long and complex legal process. The killer's mental state became the central issue in his trial, with defense attorneys arguing that his grief and obsession had rendered him incapable of rational thought. Psychiatric experts were called to testify, offering conflicting opinions about Crane's sanity. Some described him as a classic case of delusional disorder, a man whose grief had crystallized into a fixed belief system that was impervious to reason or evidence. Others argued that his careful planning and methodical execution of the murders demonstrated a mind that was disturbed but still legally responsible for its actions. Poirot attended several days of the trial, observing Crane's behavior in the dock. The botanist sat quietly throughout the proceedings, showing little emotion, even when the most damning evidence was presented against him. Only when Victoria's name was mentioned did any flicker of feeling cross his face, a brief flash of pain that was quickly suppressed. During one recess, Poirot was able to observe Crane speaking with his attorney, and he overheard fragments of their conversation. "I don't care about the verdict," Crane was saying. "I've accomplished what I set out to do. The secrets are exposed. The guilty are punished. Victoria can rest now." "Dr. Crane, you need to understand the seriousness of your situation." "I understand perfectly. I am at peace with whatever happens. I have done what needed to be done." This attitude, calm acceptance, even satisfaction, convinced Poirot that Crane was not mad in the conventional sense. He was damaged, certainly,
Obsessed, undoubtedly. But he had known exactly what he was doing when he killed those women.
And he had done it with full awareness of the consequences. The jury apparently agreed. After deliberating for 3 days, they returned a verdict of guilty on all counts, with a recommendation that the death sentence be imposed. The judge concurred, and Victor Crane was scheduled for execution within 6 months. The sentence was controversial. Many people felt sympathy for a man who had been driven to extremity by the cruelty inflicted upon his wife. Petitions were circulated calling for clemency, and several prominent figures in the scientific community spoke out against the death penalty. But the families of the victims, Sir Reginald Blackwood, the Hartwells, Lord Philip Ashworth, demanded that justice be served. 2 innocent women were dead, killed for crimes they had not committed, punished for sins that were not their own. Whatever wrongs had been done to Victoria Crane, her husband had forfeited any claim to mercy when he took those lives. In the end, the sentence was carried out. Victor Crane went to the gallows on a cold March morning, reportedly meeting his death with the same calm acceptance he had shown throughout his trial. His last words, according to the chaplain who attended him, were, "Tell Victoria I kept my promise." Chapter 10. Extended. The Unravelling of the White Rose Society. The revelations that emerged during the investigation and trial had consequences that extended far beyond the immediate case. The conspiracy of silence that had protected the White Rose Society for 20 years was finally broken, and those who had participated in the cover-up were forced to face the consequences of their actions. Lady Margaret Ashworth was the first to make a full confession, but others followed quickly once it became clear that the truth was emerging. Mrs. Helena Thorne, the wife of the orchid collector, provided detailed testimony about the night Mary Collins died, naming names and describing the decisions that had been made in the immediate aftermath. "We panicked," she said in her sworn statement. "A girl was dead, and we were terrified of what would happen if the truth came out. Our families had money, influence, power. They used all of it to protect us. The Collins family was paid off. The coroner was persuaded to render a verdict of accidental death, and we were told never to speak of it again." Who pushed Mary Collins down the stairs? I honestly don't know. There were several of us on that landing when she fell. We had been confronting her about something she had overheard, a conversation about an affair that one of our mothers was having. Mary threatened to tell, and we were desperate to stop her. There was pushing, shouting, chaos, and then she was falling, and then she was dead. You don't know who actually pushed her? It happened so fast. We were all crowded together, all reaching for her at once. It could have been any of us, or none of us. She might have simply lost her balance and fallen on her own. This ambiguity frustrated the prosecutors, who had hoped to charge someone with Mary Collins's death. In the end, the statute of limitations and the uncertainty about what had actually happened made murder charges impossible. Instead, several of the women were charged with conspiracy to obstruct justice, based on their participation in the cover-up and their ongoing efforts to suppress the truth. The sentences were relatively light, fines and probation for most, brief prison terms for those deemed most culpable. But the real punishment was social. The families involved in the conspiracy saw their reputations destroyed, their positions in society demolished. Invitations were withdrawn, memberships revoked, business relationships severed. The women who had built their lives on respectability and status
found themselves pariahs, shunned by the very circles they had once dominated. The Collins family, meanwhile, finally received the acknowledgement they had been denied for 2 decades. Mary's parents had died years earlier, but her siblings were able to give her a proper memorial, a headstone that told the truth about her death.
A ceremony that honoured her memory, a measure of closure that had been denied them for far too long. Chapter 11. Extended. Poirot's moral struggle. The resolution of the Black Orchid case left Poirot troubled in ways that previous investigations had not. He had solved the mystery, caught the killer, exposed the conspiracy that had enabled the crimes. Justice had been served, more or less. But something nagged at his conscience, some element of the case that remained unsatisfying. Part of it was Marcus Thorne, the manipulator who had provided Crane with the means to commit murder, who had used another man's madness to achieve his own ends, and who would never face consequences for his role in the deaths. Poirot knew the truth, but he could not prove it. Thorne would continue to live his comfortable life, tending his orchids and congratulating himself on his cleverness. But there was something else as well. The case had forced Poirot to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, revenge, and the limits of law. Victor Crane had been wrong to kill innocent women. That was beyond dispute. But the women of the White Rose Society had also been wrong. Wrong to cover up Mary Collins's death. Wrong to persecute Victoria Crane when she threatened to expose their secret. Wrong to maintain their conspiracy of silence for 20 years while a dead girl's family wondered what had really happened. The law had punished Crane with death, but it had punished the conspirators with mere fines and brief imprisonment. Slaps on the wrist for crimes that had destroyed lives and, ultimately, led to murder. Was that justice? Poirot was not certain. The law dealt with actions, not with their moral weight. A cover-up was a lesser crime than murder, regardless of the suffering it caused. That was how the system worked. But Poirot's grey cells rebelled against this arithmetic of justice. The women of the White Rose Society had created the conditions for Crane's crimes. If they had confessed when Victoria first confronted them, if they had faced the consequences of their actions instead of destroying a woman who dared to demand accountability, 2 innocent women would still be alive. In a sense, they were as guilty as Crane himself. Their hands had not held the silk cord that strangled Eleanor Blackwood and Catherine Hartwell, but their choices had set in motion the chain of events that led to those deaths. Justice is an imperfect instrument, Poirot reflected one evening, sitting in his flat with a cup of tisane that had gone cold. It measures actions, not intentions. It punishes outcomes, not causes. A man who kills in madness is executed. Women who drove a man to madness through cruelty walk free. He thought of Victoria Crane, the woman at the centre of all this tragedy. She had discovered a terrible secret and had tried to do the right thing, to demand accountability, to seek justice for a dead servant girl. And she had been destroyed for it, driven to suicide by people who claimed to be her friends. In a just world, Victoria would be alive, and the truth about Mary Collins would have emerged years ago. But the world was not just. It was a place where the powerful protected each other, where secrets festered until they erupted into violence, where good intentions often led to terrible outcomes. Poirot could not change this. He could only continue his work, solving crimes, exposing truths, bringing what justice he could to a world that would always be imperfect. The Black Orchid killer was dead. The conspiracy was exposed. The case was closed. But the questions it had raised would stay with Poirot for a long time. Chapter 12. Extended. The Final Reflection. Months after the case was closed, Poirot received an unexpected visitor, Dr. Paul Winters, the young researcher from the Botanical Society, who had been briefly suspected during the investigation. Winters had been promoted to a senior position, as Poirot had later learned, and was now leading the Society's orchid conservation program. He had come to share news about the black orchids that had been at the center of so much tragedy. "We've had a breakthrough," he said, his face alight with enthusiasm that reminded Poirot of why people devoted their lives to scientific research. The cultivation techniques that Dr. Crane developed before his difficulties have proven remarkably effective. We've successfully propagated 3 new plants from the original collection, bringing the total cultivated population to 8. That is excellent news. It means the species has a future. For years, we've feared that the black orchid would go extinct, that these few plants would be the last of their kind. Now we have hope that they might survive, even thrive in cultivation. Dr. Crane would be pleased, I think. For all his madness, he genuinely loved these flowers. He did, and despite everything, his research has contributed significantly to our understanding of how to preserve them. Winters hesitated. "I wanted to ask you something, Monsieur Poirot. Something that has troubled me since the case was resolved." "Ask?" "Do you believe that beauty can coexist with darkness? That something so magnificent as the black orchid can be associated with such terrible events and still retain its worth?" Poirot considered the question carefully. "I believe that beauty exists independently of the uses to which it is put. The black orchid did not choose to become a symbol of murder. That choice was made by a troubled human mind. The flower itself is innocent, if we can use such a word for a plant, of any wrongdoing. But the association remains. Whenever people see a black orchid now, they think of the murders. They think of Victor Crane and his victims. For a time, yes, but memories fade and new associations are formed. A generation from now, the black orchid may be known primarily for its rarity and beauty, while the crimes committed in its name are forgotten or relegated to historical curiosity. I hope so. These flowers deserve better than to be remembered only for the deaths they adorned. Then it is your task, yours and your colleagues, to give them that better legacy. Study them, preserve them, help them flourish. That is the best way to honor their true nature." Winters nodded slowly. "You're right, of course. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot." After the young scientist had gone, Poirot sat for a while in contemplation. The black orchid case had been one of the most complex of his career, not merely in terms of the puzzle it presented, but in the moral questions it raised about justice, revenge, and the tangled web of cause and effect that connected human actions across years and generations. He thought of Victor Crane, brilliant and broken, driven to murder by grief and obsession. He thought of Victoria Crane, destroyed by those who should have been her friends. He thought of Mary Collins, a servant girl whose death had rippled through decades to claim more victims. He thought of Eleanor Blackwood and Catherine Hartwell, innocent women killed for sins they had not committed. And he thought of Marcus Thorne, the manipulator who had escaped justice,
tending his orchids in his mansion, while the consequences of his actions fell on others. The world was imperfect. Justice was imperfect. Even Hercule Poirot, with all his grey cells and all his determination, could not set everything right. But he could try. He could continue his work, one case at a time, one truth at a time. He could shine light into dark corners and expose the secrets that festered there. He could bring what order he could to a chaotic world. That was his calling. That was his purpose. The Black Orchid killer was gone, but Hercule Poirot remained, ready for whatever mystery the world might next present to his extraordinary mind. Chapter 11. The Collector's Secret. In the weeks that followed the trial, Poirot found himself troubled by certain loose ends in the case. Details that did not quite fit the pattern he had constructed. Questions that had never been fully answered. One such question concerned Marcus Thorne, the wealthy orchid collector who had been among the first to point Poirot toward Dr. Crane as a suspect. Thorne had claimed to be merely a rival collector, someone who had knowledge of Crane's obsessions but no personal involvement in the murders. But several details nagged at Poirot's grey cells. First, there was the matter of Thorne's wife, Helena, who had been one of the founding members of the White Rose Society, and therefore one of Crane's intended targets. She had not been attacked, despite being among those most directly responsible for Victoria Crane's persecution. Second, there was the question of how Crane had obtained his supply of black orchids. The killer had claimed to have bred them himself, but botanical experts who examined his facility after his arrest expressed skepticism. The plants found there were mature specimens, not the products of recent cultivation. And third, there was Thorne's eagerness to assist in the investigation, his quick naming of Crane as a suspect, his apparent certainty about the killer's identity even before any evidence had been gathered. Poirot decided to pay another visit to the collector's estate. He found Thorne in his greenhouse, as before, tending to his precious specimens with an attention that bordered on obsessive. The collector seemed unsurprised by Poirot's visit, greeting him with the same thin smile he had worn during their first encounter. "Monsieur Poirot, I understand you solved the case. Victor Crane has been convicted and sentenced to death. Congratulations." "Thank you, but I find myself troubled by certain aspects of the case that were never fully explained." "Oh? What aspects?" "The black orchids, for one. Doctor, Crane claimed to have cultivated his own supply, but expert opinion suggests that his specimens were mature plants, not recently bred. Someone provided him with the flowers he used in his killings." Thorne's expression did not change. "A fascinating observation. And you suspect that someone was me?" "I suspect that there is more to your involvement in this case than you have revealed." For a long moment, Thorne was silent. Then, slowly, he began to laugh. A cold, mirthless sound that echoed through the greenhouse. "You are even more perceptive than I gave you credit for, Monsieur Poirot." "Very well. I will tell you the truth. Or at least, some of it." He set down his gardening tools and faced Poirot directly. "Yes, I provided Victor Crane with the black orchids he used in his killings. I gave him mature specimens from my personal collection, along with detailed instructions for their care. Without my assistance, his campaign of revenge could never have begun." "Why? What did you hope to gain?" "Revenge of my own. Not against the same targets as Victor, but against those who had wronged me in different ways." "Explain." Thorn's eyes glittered with something dark and ancient. My wife, Helena, was one of the founding members of the White Rose Society. She was also one of those who conspired to cover up the servant girl's death 20 years ago. She has carried that guilt all her life, and it has poisoned our marriage, made her distant, secretive, impossible to reach. You wanted her to be punished for her role in the cover-up. I wanted her to face what she had done. I wanted the truth to come out, the secrets to be exposed, the comfortable lies she had been living with to be stripped away. When Victor Crane approached me, desperate and obsessed, raving about his plans for revenge, I saw an opportunity. You manipulated him, used his grief and madness to achieve your own ends. I gave him the tools he needed to pursue his vendetta. The black orchids, the information about the White Rose Society, the knowledge of how to find and approach his victims. In return, I asked only that he spare Helena, not out of love, but because I wanted her to live with the consequences of her actions, rather than escape them through death. You are as guilty of murder as Crane himself. Am I? I never killed anyone. I never planned the attacks or chose the victims. I merely facilitated a process that was already in motion. The law may see it differently. The law will never hear of my involvement. Thorn's voice was calm, confident. Victor Crane is dead. He was executed this morning, in case you hadn't heard. Whatever he might have told the authorities about my role died with him. And you, Monsieur Poirot, have no proof of what I have just told you. My confession was made in private, with no witnesses. It would be your word against mine. Poirot studied the collector carefully, his grey cells processing this new information. Thorn was right. Without corroborating evidence, it would be nearly impossible to prove his involvement in the murders. The man had calculated carefully, positioned himself to benefit from Crane's crimes while remaining legally untouchable. You are a monster, Monsieur Thorn. I am a realist, Monsieur Poirot. The world is full of injustice, full of wrongs that go unpunished because the law is too slow or too corrupt to act. Sometimes, justice requires assistance from those willing to work outside the boundaries of respectability. What you call justice is merely another form of cruelty. Perhaps, but cruelty is often effective where kindness fails. Thorn turned back to his orchids, dismissing Poirot with a wave of his hand. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do. My specimens require constant attention, and I have already given you more of my time than I can spare. Poirot left the greenhouse with a heavy heart. He had solved the case of the Black Orchid killer, had brought a murderer to justice, had exposed the secrets that had festered for decades. But in doing so, he had also uncovered another layer of evil. A manipulator who had used another man's grief to achieve his own ends, and who would never face consequences for his crimes. Such was the imperfection of human justice. Such was the darkness that lurked behind the most beautiful facades. Chapter 12. Epilogue and Reflection. The case of the Black Orchid killer was closed, but its reverberations continued to be felt throughout London society for months afterward. The founding members of the White Rose Society, who had survived Crane's vendetta, faced trial for their role in the original cover-up, and several received prison sentences. The organisation itself was dissolved, its charitable work taken over by other groups whose members had not been tainted by scandal. Lord Philip Ashworth, who had lost his fiancée to the killer's madness, eventually married a woman he met through his charitable work, a nurse who had known Eleanor Blackwood, and who shared her passion for helping those in need.
They named their first daughter Eleanor, in honor of the woman whose death had brought them together. Dr. Helena Marsh continued her work at the Botanical Society, but she never entirely recovered from the revelations about her organization and its members. She had trusted people who proved unworthy of that trust, and the experience left her more guarded, more skeptical, more alone. Dr. Paul Winters, the young researcher who had been suspected early in the investigation, was eventually promoted to a senior position at the Society. He dedicated his career to the preservation of rare species, including the black orchids that had been at the centre of such tragedy. And Marcus Thorne continued to tend his greenhouse, his collection of rare plants growing ever more extensive, his reputation as a collector of impeccable taste remaining untarnished. He and Helena remained married, though those who knew them said the relationship had changed, become colder, more formal, more like a business arrangement than a union of hearts. Poirot watched all of this from a distance, troubled by what he knew and what he could not prove. He had encountered many killers in his career, many criminals who had evaded justice through cunning or connections or simple luck. But Thorne was different. A man who had orchestrated murder without ever lifting a finger himself, who had used another's madness as a weapon while keeping his own hands clean. It was, Poirot reflected, a form of evil that was particularly insidious because it was so difficult to combat. The law punished actions, not intentions. It required evidence, not intuition. A man like Thorne could manipulate events from the shadows indefinitely, destroying lives while maintaining an appearance of respectability. But the truth has a way of emerging, Poirot murmured to himself one evening, sitting in his London flat with a cup of tisane. The secrets always come out in the end, as Dr. Crane said before his death. Marcus Thorne believes he has escaped justice, but justice is patient. It will find him eventually, in this life or the next. He thought of the black orchids, those rare and terrible flowers that had become symbols of death and revenge. They bloomed in darkness, thrived in conditions that would kill ordinary plants, survived against all odds in environments that seemed designed to destroy them. In a way, they were perfect metaphors for the case itself. Beautiful on the surface, deadly underneath. Products of obsession and specialized knowledge that most people could never hope to understand. The black orchid killer was dead. The secrets had been exposed. Justice, however imperfect, had been served. But the orchids continued to bloom, in greenhouses and private collections throughout the world. And somewhere, in a mansion on the outskirts of London, a collector tended his specimens with careful attention, smiling to himself as he contemplated the power of patience and the satisfactions of revenge achieved through others' hands. Such was the nature of evil. It could be defeated in one form, only to emerge in another, adapting and surviving like the most tenacious of plants. And such was the nature of justice, imperfect, incomplete, but always seeking, always striving, always working toward a balance that might never fully be achieved, but was always worth pursuing. Poirot set down his cup and gazed out the window at the London evening. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new puzzles, new opportunities to exercise his grey cells in the eternal struggle between order and chaos, justice and injustice.
good and evil. The Black Orchid killer was gone, but the work of Hercule Poirot would continue, one case at a time, one truth at a time, until the last of his grey cells finally fell silent. Thank you for joining us on the Little Grey Cells for the Black Orchid Killer. If this tale of rare flowers, long-buried secrets, and the terrible price of revenge captured your imagination, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Did you suspect Marcus Thorne's involvement before the final reveal surprised you? What did you think of Dr. Victor Crane? Was he a monster beyond redemption, consumed by hatred and obsession? Or was he a man driven to madness by the cruelty inflicted upon his beloved wife, Victoria? And what about the founding members of the White Rose Society, whose conspiracy of silence created the conditions for so much tragedy over so many years? Did they receive the justice they deserved? Or did they escape too lightly for crimes that destroyed lives and ultimately led to murder? These are questions without easy answers, touching as they do upon the deepest mysteries of human nature, our capacity for both extraordinary love and extraordinary cruelty, for justice and for vengeance, for beauty and for destruction. We love hearing from fellow mystery enthusiasts, and your engagement helps us bring more tales of the little Belgian detective to life. The world of Hercule Poirot is vast and endlessly fascinating, filled with puzzles that challenge the mind and moral dilemmas that trouble the conscience, with villains who believe themselves righteous and heroes who question their own methods. Until next time, keep those grey cells active and well exercised. Remember that the most beautiful flowers can conceal the deadliest poisons, and that secrets buried in darkness will always seek the light. And trust that truth, like a rare orchid blooming in impossible conditions, will eventually emerge no matter how long it has been kept hidden. The black orchid may be the flower of death in this tale, but Poirot's methods of observation and deduction bring life to justice and order to chaos. Farewell, dear listeners and fellow seekers of truth, and may your own investigations lead you to wisdom, understanding, and the satisfaction of puzzles well solved.